Now we're looking at solving quadratic equations, and we have all of those different methods for factoring that you've been practicing. And remember that when we're solving a quadratic equation, we're using the zero factor theorem, which is why in these examples that we're looking at here, we see that we always have our equations equal to zero before we start factoring. And in question 4, I reminded you that you should open those brackets first, then set your equation to equal 0. So let's just jump right in with 2 questions. Of course, in question 5, you're going to open the brackets first, let your equation equal 0, and then solve. And why don't you pause your video and give that a try. Now, I just wanted to point something out here. Make sure that you gather like terms before you make your equation equal 0. That simplifying of each side of the equation is something we've been talking about since the beginning of the semester, and I hope that by now you're well practiced in that. Now you can, of course, go ahead and factor this trinomial. So using the zero factor theorem, we have 2 equations now that equal 0. I hope you were able to find that x equals 8 and -3. Of course, if you're showing this inside the brace brackets, you don't need to write x equals there. We just separate our answers by a comma. So let's talk about question 6. Question 6 is a sum of cubes. We can write this as x cubed plus 2 cubed. Now, I hope you've got the formula for factoring a sum of cubes memorized. A plus b times a squared minus ab plus b squared. Of course, remember that's equal to 0. Now, here's what we know. We know that that trinomial can't be factored any further. But I have 2 equations now that could equal 0. In the first equation, we see that x equals -2. What we're going to see as we talk more about solving quadratic equations is that this one cannot be factored. And in fact, it is a prime trinomial. Some of you are familiar with the quadratic formula. Let's use that here and see what happens when I plug my values for a, b, and c into that formula. We see that a, the number multiplying x squared, is 1. We see that b, the number multiplying x, is -2. And c, our constant, is 4. The quadratic formula tells us that x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared, while -2 squared is 4, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. I want to look specifically at this part under the radical sign. We have 4 minus 4 times 1 times 4. This is known as the discriminant. And we see that it's a negative number. Well, we've already talked about the square root of negative values. There's no real solution. So the only part of the formula for factoring a sum of cubes that has a solution is the first binomial here. It gives us a solution of x equals -2. That's the only solution for this equation. This looks like a good test question, a good exam question. We're being asked to find the x-intercepts of the graph. Well, how do we find the x-intercepts? The same way we always do, by letting y equal 0. Well, think about that. If we let y equal 0, all I'm asking you to do here is solve a quadratic equation. Why don't you pause your video and solve this? So you factored the quadratic trinomial. You have two equations that you can solve, two linear equations. We see that x equals 1/2 and 6. These are the x-intercepts. So if I was asking you to graph those, you would have an x-intercept at x equals 6 and at x equals 1/2. Those are the coordinates where y is equal to 0. Lots of practice questions for you. The answers for these are posted on your class Moodle page. You can use these to get ready for your next test or to start preparing for your final exam.